Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Road to Racial Justice. I'm going to be your host tonight, and my name is Krish Kandaya. We'd love to find out where in the world you're watching this stream from. Please use the chat as a way to cheer on things that you're enjoying, things that you agree with. Say amen. If you've got questions, there's going to be live questions from you. Some of our fantastic panelists throughout this evening. Our prayer tonight is that you come away inspired, encouraged, and challenged to continue fighting for racial justice. I believe it's a Christian calling to pursue racial justice because we believe in a God who loves the whole world. And if we, the church, don't love the whole world, we are a contradiction of the message we seek to proclaim. We've got an incredible lineup for you tonight. Some pre-recorded videos that have been recorded especially for our time together, and some live studio guests who can help us dig deep into these topics. We hope you have a fantastic evening, and please make use of the chat so that we can keep this conversation going. Our evening tonight is sponsored by Tearfund, and we've got some brand new resources that they've produced just for this event to help you dig deeper as we go through this evening. But we're delighted that we can start our evening with prayer. And Pastor Agu, who is the leader of Jesus House and the Redeemed Church of God, recorded this prayer for us this evening.
It's a real privilege to be asked to pray to open up this conference. 1 year ago, in America, George Floyd was killed on the streets of Minneapolis. A brutal way to die at the hands of law enforcement agents. It sparked riots all around the world as people protested. Outrage poured out of our hearts. There was a lot of anger. But it then went on to bring about change because it was as if we all reached a point where we said enough is enough. 1 year on, there has been progress, not as much as most of us wanted, but certainly there has been progress. And we're gathered here today to talk so that we can be a part of even more progress as we deal with the issues of racial injustice and racial discrimination. And so I just want to say a prayer for our gathering, this conference. Heavenly Father, I just want to thank you for this opportunity to come together to talk about an issue that we know is dear to your heart. Your Bible is very clear. Your Son drove home this message against racial injustice and discrimination and the evil that racism is. And so, Father, we are asking that as we commit ourselves into your hands, your Spirit will come and take complete control. We're asking that we will be gracious by your Spirit as we speak, but that we will speak the truth, speak it in kindness, but speak the truth, Heavenly Father. And so, Holy Spirit, please come and rest upon every single one of us. And we take this opportunity to once again pray for George Floyd's family, that you will continue to comfort and heal them, Heavenly Father. Father, we just thank you. We I pronounce a blessing on this gathering in your name, in the name of your Son, Jesus, and in the name of your Spirit. Amen and amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, Pastor Agu. It's wonderful to be joined by Bishop Rose Hudson Wilkin, the Bishop of Dover, and previously the chaplain to the Speaker of the House. She's going to be praying for us in a minute. But let's take a minute to reflect. It's been a year since the death of George Floyd. So many things have happened around the world. Maybe, like Pastor Agu, you'd want to use this minute to pray for George Floyd's family. Or maybe there's something in your bones that you feel that needs to be put right. Maybe there's a moment or a situation of racial injustice that you really want to pray into as we start this evening together. So let's just mark a minute of silence out of respect for George Floyd, but you may want to use that time for prayer. So let's pray silently wherever we are in the world.
We sum up our thoughts and prayers at this time. Lord Jesus Christ, you wept at the grave of Lazarus. We know you wept a year ago. You continue to weep at lives being lost. At this time, we commend to you the soul of our brother George Floyd. Into your hands, O merciful Savior, we commend him to you. Acknowledge, we pray, a sheep of your own fold, a lamb of your own flock, a sinner of your own redeeming. Enfold him continually in the arms of your mercy, in the blessed rest of everlasting peace. Give rest, O Christ, to your servant with the saints, where sorrow and pain are no more, neither sighing, but life everlasting. And bless us now as we deliberate consciously, intentionally, together. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much, Bishop Rose. I've commented to you before, with Anglican bishops like you, this Baptist is thinking about becoming an Anglican. Thank you for what you do. We're going to be hearing from you a little bit later on in a panel discussion, but we're going to come to another bishop. Bishop Tom Wright recently wrote an article for The Spectator as someone accused the church's interest in racial justice as just another woke fashion. Well, this is what Bishop Tom Wright had to say in answer to that question. Is it just woke to care about racial justice?
About 10 years ago, the church was struggling with the issue of women bishops. And somebody in the House of Commons asked the Prime Minister, David Cameron, as PM then, a question about this. And Cameron said, yeah, the church should get with the programme. They need to wake up and smell the coffee and blah, 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 blah. And I wrote an article in the Times and I said, it isn't about a secular programme which the church must catch up with. This began on resurrection morning when Jesus commissioned Mary Magdalene to go and tell the others that he was raised from the dead. Announcing that the crucified Jesus is raised from the dead is the foundation of all Christian ministry. And guess who gets to do it first? And so I said, this is something which the church has been slow to take up. And so we shouldn't be surprised if we get nudged by the secular world. But if we happen to go that route, it's not because we're letting the secular world set the agenda. And in the same way, we have been so slow on the multiculturalism that I've said it again and again in things I've written recently. The church was the original multicultural project. If we have forgotten that and shrunken back into our own separate identities, shame on us. And if it takes people out there in the world to embrace this as a secular agenda, then watch out, because that will bring other problems in its train. But it's our fault because we left a vacuum, and if other people are filling it, so be it. I mean, as I've said many times, even Jesus faced this problem. He says the kingdom of God is coming, breaking in violently. And the men of violence are trying to get in on the act because they hear the slogan kingdom of God and they said, ooh, whoopee, yes, this is when we sharpen our swords. And Jesus is saying, no, that's precisely the problem. But that doesn't stop him saying kingdom of God just because other people are using it to further their own agendas. In the same way, we mustn't stop doing and being and saying this essentially multicultural agenda. But what we have to remember, I think I said this in an article recently as well, in the New Testament, this is you are all one in Messiah Jesus. It isn't, well, we can forget about Jesus now, let's just try and create some social experiments. This ain't going to happen unless you have Jesus at the heart of it. And that sounds very exclusive, but, well, people have been trying it without Jesus, and it doesn't seem to have been a great success. Why don't we try it with Jesus and see what happens?
How do we live out this kingdom picture that Paul was expounding, that Jesus modeled? What could that look like in terms of pursuing justice today?
Yeah, it's huge, Krish, obviously. And I have grieved over this, and I've got friends in America who I talk to quite a lot. And I have actually, I mean, I think there are some things that have to be named here. And one is, I've had the reaction from one or two people saying, oh, watch out, you're getting in bed with those BLM people. And, you know, they're basically Marxists and they're anti-family and they're this and they're that. And Antifa is all part of that, et cetera, et cetera. And that's where I've pulled out that line from Jesus in Matthew 11 about the men of violence trying to get in on the act. Well, of course, if we leave that bit of our proper agenda undone, other people with other agendas are going to see that there's a gap and come in and try and fill it. But the answer to that is not, oh, they're all wicked and we mustn't ever do anything remotely like that. The answer is we should be modeling and doing what we were always commissioned to do and what the Spirit will enable us to do if we aren't so rebellious. And then if the BLM people see that actually the church was and is doing that, and to be fair, the church is doing it in many, many places. I've been in many multicultural churches, which are just an absolute delight, and where this just isn't an issue anymore, just like in many churches, women's leadership isn't an issue anymore, but some people are still terribly nervous about it. And part of the problem here is, of course, the very specific history of America, where you know, which, as I said to my American friends, and obviously I lecture in America quite a bit, I've all been on Zoom recently, but I've spent a lot of time in America. The danger with America being so big and so dominant and so prolific in terms of theological and Christian writing and speaking now is that they see everything through their particular history, which has the horrible taint of slavery, et cetera, and the Jim Crow laws and all this and all that, and still going on with the new legislation in Georgia, et cetera, which we all know about and grieve over. But actually the rest of the world has not been like that. We have been sinful too, we've done things wrong too, but it's more complicated. And so there is a polarization in America at the moment, which then tends to project itself onto the rest of the world. And we need to say, no, please don't do that. Because yes, you've got major issues, we have major issues as well, but they don't sit quite the same. We don't have the same history, the same shared memories. So somehow we need to have the conversation transnationally, translocally, among Christian churches today of all sorts and conditions, and learn from churches in Africa and Southeast Asia and wherever.
Bishop Tom, thank you. Thanks not just for this interview, which has been so helpful and will help many people wrestle with this massive challenge that we're facing about polarization over race. But thanks for your scholarship. Thanks for your voice. Thanks that you don't just stay in the kind of academic world, that you're willing to speak into public issues. We're very grateful for you, and we're cheering you on in all your endeavors. So thank you very much.
Krish, thank you, and thank you for all you do.
Thank you very much, Professor Wright. Sorry for that little echo we had at the end. Now, what an amazing bunch of guests we have with us now. It's going to be great to hear more from Bishop Rose. We'll also be hearing from Professor Robert Beckford, who is the first professor of Black theology in the United Kingdom, and he has that position at Queen's Ecumenical Foundation in Birmingham. He is also Professor of Theology of Social Justice at Winchester University, and I think he also holds a position in a university in Holland. So going to hear from Professor Beckford in a minute, but we're going to start hearing from the Reverend Celia, who is a leadership trainer and coach working globally in 45 different countries, but has a particular heart for Ghana and the United Kingdom. Let me come to you, Pastor Celia. Why is this still an issue that the church needs to look at? What is going on with racism inside our church communities right now in the United Kingdom?
Thank you so much, Chris. It's such an honor to be here, and I'm glad that everywhere we go, we're talking about this, because I think that's the key. If we keep silence, nobody's going to tell our story for us, and our voices will not be heard. But first thing I want to say is that crisis doesn't just focus on what's happening at the moment. The whole thing about crisis is the response to crisis. Is the response. That's what brings the change. As long as we keep that holy discontent going, then we can have transformation. So the first thing I'm going to say is I like the temperature. That's one of the things that churches need to do, is just to check that temperature. The moment the thermometer goes low, we're in trouble. The next thing I want to say is this, that some 11 verse 7 says this in the Message. He says, God is in the business of putting things right. If we're God's people, we must put things right. If you put things right, that means that you're recognizing that some things are wrong. And over the years, one of the things that we haven't done is we haven't faced up to it. Let me start with the Black church. I'm from Ghana. We haven't faced up to it. We've kept quiet. We've swallowed it. When we've been patronized, when we've been sidelined, when we've been added to things just as token black, so somebody can tick a box, we have kept silent. And time is now not to keep silent. I'll also tell you something that the church, because I'm looking even beyond the borders of the UK, I'm looking at Africa, I'm looking at our homes where we came from. Do you know that, and I can speak as a Ghanaian, that our standard for saying something is excellent is saying, Nipa no ye Bronio, that person is a Caucasian, he's a white man. Look how good that standard is. If we don't change that narrative, we don't change that kind of dialect, we will forever suffer this. And I'm challenging right now the church in Africa. I'm challenging the church in Ghana. Take that out, because it all starts from the paradigm. It starts from a belief system. And so I'm very confident that as the church takes this on theologically, it's one thing to take it on as a social issue, but when we see it theologically, one of the things that I believe we must do is that I want to see not just racism on our curriculum. I want to see it as children's Sunday school, the value of man. I want to see it as part of what we teach, as part of our discipleship training. So from Sunday school right up, because nobody can consistently live and consistently behave in a way that is inconsistent with their belief system.
Amazing.
Racism didn't just, yeah.
So good. I want to bring Professor Beckford in here, because here's someone who's very committed to the whole area of theological education. You were telling me about an experiment that you do with your students that kind of shows some of the issues that are ongoing with racism within the church.
Yeah. Thank you for inviting me this evening. It's really great to be here amongst such a distinguished panel, and to have so many people are listening in as well. Before I get to that, let's just tackle what Tom Wright said, NT Wright said, first of all. I mean, what's he drinking? Because you've got to be on another planet to have that kind of historical amnesia and suggest that the problems happening in America are different from in the UK. What planet have you not heard of British colonialism? Do you not understand how Britain exported racism to South Africa? Have you not understood of the racial terror that the church was a part of in the West Indies? The brutality, the genocide that it was a part of in the Americas when English people settled there? That's part of the problem. That's why we're in this predicament, because people teaching in institutions of higher education commit that kind of intellectual dishonesty and do not address their own complicity. As a black man, I'm insulted that someone would be that neglectful of the history of racialized oppression that the English have visited upon my people and upon many black and brown people on this planet. So that's the first thing. Let's talk about the historical amnesia. Let's also deal with the fact, I mean, when people say that you just need to do it the way that Jesus did, why didn't they do that in 1492? Why didn't Columbus just encounter the indigenous people and say, Jesus loves you? They slaughtered them. There's something problematic within Western Christianity and its entanglement with whiteness that produces that kind of genocidal activity. So we need to acknowledge some plain facts before we start talking about how we go forward. What Tom Wright didn't say is that there's 160 recommendations since 1980 in the Church of England to address issues of racism that they never addressed. That's why they're behind the times. That's why they're behind Black Lives Matter and everybody else, because they never address the issues. There's currently an Archbishop of Canterbury's task force addressing racism with the church. So let's just deal with that kind of nonsense first of all, that if we're going to have an honest discussion about how we move forward, we've got to put the cards on the table. Whiteness is complicit. The Christian church is complicit. The gospel has failed. It's catastrophic failure in terms of racial justice. Unless we can do the emotional work of working through that, we're not going to make any progress. Now we'll go, let me just tell you quickly about the experiment I do to my students to deal with the way in which the church and Christian theology has been complicit with racial terror rather than resisting it. I asked them to go to the library and look for all the books published by theologians racialized as white in Britain in the last 200 years that have addressed issues of racialized discrimination theologically. They come back 2 books. that they can locate. I then say to them, go and find all the books that you can written by English theologians, racialized as white, on being nice to animals, animal theology. I'm not having a dig at animal theology. I'm just using it as a contrast to show what counts in English theology as theology. They come back and say there's over 50 books. And then ask them to consider, given that there's a history of Black people being seen as chattel, dehumanized, stigmatized, traumatized, how do we account for the fact that we have a guild that's more interested in writing about animals than dealing with its 500-year sojourn with racial terror? It's tragic. It's a catastrophe. And I think how Tom Wright introduced this represents the continuation of that catastrophe.
Thank you, Professor Beckford. I'm glad you're here. We want to have the critique. This is a safe space to ask difficult questions. And friends, please use the chat to ask those questions if you want to raise some questions. To be fair to the Bishop, we had a half-an-hour interview that I've only given you a snippet of. We're going to make the whole interview available as a podcast after this event. So make sure that you're on the mailing list, friends. But Professor Beckford raises a challenging point, Bishop Rose, about the unresolved racism. It isn't just the Church of England that's got an issue with this. It is across churches. But why has it taken so long for us to deal with those recommendations? I think, what did you say, 114?
No, over 160 odd or 70 something. I just want to say that when the Bishop was saying that what's happening in America is very different from here, I must admit that I was screaming inside, and I will get alongside him at some point and say, my brother, no. The fact of the matter is we are where we are because, as my brother Robert has said, as a church, as white people in Britain, we have not faced up to our history. We do actually, my brother Robert, I think there is a genuine ignorance. There is a genuine ignorance where people do not know. People do not understand why they treat Black people the way they do. They do not understand. They think, I wonder if they think it's just osmosis they heard from their mother or their father or whatever. There is a history to it. There is something there. And until we relearn, and people will say, oh, but why do you want to go and dig up the past? We have to, because we have not learned from it. When we walk into a place of work and we see Black people in a particular position, and then we go into the boardroom and we don't see them, do we not ask ourselves, why is that? What is happening? Is it that Black people are ignorant why they're not in the boardroom, why they're not in significant senior leadership roles? And I know there are going to be people screaming at the screen now and saying, but you are a bishop. Listen, not because one person is a bishop makes it all right. It doesn't make it right. The fact of the matter is, we are ignorant to our history, the history that will tell us about the brutalization of Black people for profit. And so what we have coming down through the centuries is a lie, a story that says this person isn't good enough because of the color of their skin, which then fails to tell the real story that white people, Europeans, behaved in a way that was detrimental to the human race. The one area which I would disagree with my brother Robert, when you said that the gospel failed, I actually believe that it's not the gospel message that failed. It is we who profess the message who have failed, because what we have done, we have wrapped the message up in our cultural. We didn't want to teach us it. There is a church in Jamaica that still has the pews with the chains running through, which was where they chained the people who came in for worship. That is ungodly. I visited Ghana, and at the place where people were kept in caves before they were transported to the West, someone decided that it was okay to build a church and to worship above. That destroyed me when I saw that. So it is not the gospel of love. As a matter of fact, that's what made people fight.
Mm.
The nanny of the Maroons, the others from Jamaica. That's what made them fight, because the Bible told them that they were human beings, contrary to how these so-called people were treating them.
And
Thank you,
that's
Mr.
why
Rose.
I said about it's a belief system. Don't you think that these people believe, they truly believe that there is a hierarchy of chain of value? They still believe we're not of value. So we are making noise. And so if we, and I believe there's been some complicity in how we ourselves have accepted it. It's time to fight. I just want to throw this in because this is about how we tackle it as the church. The bottom line with pastors is money. Going forward, I want to see how much of our budgets are allocated to change, to transformation. Because for church leaders, it's about budgets. It's about the goals that we set. So how many churches right now, we can complain all we like. We have to effect the change. They're not going to do it for us. And so how many of us in our 10-year goals have racial equity and dealing with injustice as part of our goals? We don't. So we're going to wait for another incident like we had last year to happen, and we're going to talk about it, and nothing that matters moves on. So I'm throwing, again, a challenge. If you're a church pastor and you're listening to me, I want to see what your goals look like. I want to see what outcomes you're looking at.
Thank
I
you.
want to see what your budget looks like.
I think that's so important, especially in terms of talking about West African churches who have been historically silent on these issues of racialized oppression, racial injustice. It's great to see Pastor Agu actually now standing up. But you got to ask, where's Redeemed Church when Scarman was around? Where's the Redeemed Church when Stephen Lawrence was being? Where's Redeemed Church when Black Lives Matter kicked off? So it's great that they're on board, but they need to also reflect critically on what it was theologically, culturally, politically that stopped them from speaking out in the past when people needed to hear them.
Yes.
We have to acknowledge, just to pick up on what Rosie said, I completely agree, that version of the gospel failed. The problem is, in the British history, they haven't changed it. It's still a white supremacist version of Christianity. That's still the problem. I mean, that's why N.T. Wright was saying he's been to multicultural churches and there are no problems. Who's he reading? Has he not read Anthony Reddy's work on this? Has he not read the last 20 years of black people in mainstream churches talking about racialized oppression? I mean,
Fantastic.
I'm staggered.
I'm
staggered
loving this
that somebody
discussion.
could make those claims. So all I'm
Thank
saying
you,
is
Professor.
we just need to be honest about the data and what people have written and what the research says.
Thank you, Professor. I'm loving the robustness of this conversation. Lots of comments. Thank you for speaking graciously but strongly into this space. We're going to transition into another area of conversation in a minute. We've begun to look in our own backyard. What does the church need to do internally? And we've heard things about facing the facts, checking what our gospel presentation is, where we're confronting racial inequality, really helpful challenges. One church that's been doing that recently is Hope City Church in Sheffield, who had to face a really challenging moment with their senior pastor. And I spent a bit of time with Colin Davis, who's the executive leader of that network of churches, and he shared this little interview with us. So we'll pick this up again in a bit, but let's hear from Colin Davis.
Colin, it seems to have been quite a challenging year for Hope City Church. For those of us that haven't been following the story closely, could you just give us a quick overview?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, for us, everything sort of happened in June last year, so shortly after the death of George Floyd, of course. And I suppose that incident obviously created a global impact, and it, I suppose that the ramifications were felt through churches and other institutions, I guess. And we were no exception to that at all. And I think it legitimized the voice of people of color, really, and rightly so as well. It came about really as actually, ironically, through an apology that the senior minister made for doing something which, in hindsight, they felt was racially discriminative, and that sort of created this almost like a social media storm from other people who'd felt the same thing, being part of the church. And so it was quite interesting to see how that sort of happened over, well, of course, with just a few days. but ultimately result in us needing to address that with the senior minister as trustees.
As I understand it, you took quite a difficult line and had to actually let the pastor go. What was that like? What were the implications of that for the church?
Wow, I mean, who would have thought that would ever happen in the life of a church, or certainly in terms of our church? I mean, the church was planted by the senior minister. So he was the founder of the church 30 years ago. And so coming to the decision was a painful decision. The outworking of that decision was even more painful, I guess, in the sense of I suppose recognizing the impact on people and also the impact on the organization as well.
Looking back, are there things that you think actually we could have spotted this earlier? We knew something was wrong, and we might have played things differently with hindsight.
Well, hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it? I've searched long and hard in my own mind and plenty of discussions about this. I mean, I'll give you an example of something we've now got a whistleblowing policy in place. But I honestly, if I were to ask the question, would have that made any difference at the time? I'm not 100% sure. So, but there were early signs. So, for example, for us, I think one of the key things would have been that associated with the racial discrimination would have been a kind of I suppose, a toxic leadership culture, which probably maybe allowed that to actually take place in the first place. And so, if I was to really think about, the types of things that would have been early warning signs, I guess, then that would have been more about the toxic culture rather than necessarily about how it ultimately showed itself, which was in racial discrimination. So yes, it's possible. I think I've done a lot of research about this, more in hindsight again than in foresight. But yes, there are things we could have done, I think, over time, over the last 15 years probably, to address that and probably create better accountability, I guess.
Thank you, Colin. And thanks so much for sharing this. When we talk about racial disparity, racial injustice, my feeling is we must get our own house in order. And sometimes that means facing up to some really tough stuff. So it means a lot to us that you've shared that today. Thank you, Colin. And I know, Colin, in the kind of outworking of that huge issue, a racist pastor needed to be fired from the church. Hope City Church made great use of a resource from Tearfund in their kind of anti-racism toolkit. So you might want to get hold of that to see how that could help your church go on that journey. And if you look in the chat, you'll see a link to that resource. More news of some more resources as we go forward this evening. This is a real conversation, some strong views being shared here. And thank you for those that are participating in the chat to kind of help this conversation move along. So we've had a look, haven't we, at what it means we need to do in our own backyard, how the church needs to get its own house in order. If we're not one people who love each other, we've got nothing really to offer the world. So we do need to start at home. But we're still called as Christians to make an impact in that world. We're called to be salt and light. How can Christians pursue racial justice in the wider world? It was my privilege to catch up with Lord Hastings, who's a member of the House of Lords, who's had a career in pursuing racial justice, was the head of corporate and social responsibility for the huge firm KPMG. I asked him, what is it that keeps him hopeful as he seeks to pursue racial justice in public life?
Well, thanks, Chris. I mean, I am instinctively an optimist in pretty much all things. And I have to remember the words of Martin Luther King when he said that ultimately, the arc bends towards justice. And when I look back over my very long years, having sat and watched his speeches in the 1960s, and having gone through the journey to where I became a commissioner for racial equality in the 1990s and had to work on the Stephen Lawrence case and bringing about the Macpherson report and the changes to the law and the Race Relations Act in the 2000s, I've been on this journey a very long time, and I've seen real progress. And I look around me in the Palace of Westminster, the number of MPs who are now of different cultures and backgrounds and colours, and the number of peers in the House of Lords who are different cultures and backgrounds and genders. We've made meaningful progress. But if you say, am I content as compared to optimistic. Now, I'm optimistic, but I'm not content, because I'm not in any way pleased that what we see at the moment is a satisfactory state of affairs. It is not. We're having this conversation because it is a year on from the killing, I'm inclined to say slaughter, public slaughter of George Floyd, for everyone in the world to see. And even since that point, the continuing killing of young, particularly young Black men on the streets of US cities has continued, even in the very same city in which this atrocity a year ago took place. So in that sense of the word, I feel the weight of despair. You wonder why systemic destructive racism is so embedded into what are meant to be public service and justice systems that it can perpetuate to this extent. But what is the hope? Well, the hope is this: mature, relevant conversations, I believe in practical solutions as compared to endlessly banging the streets and despairing.
I mean, some people would say that the UK and the US situation are very different. The kinds of things that UK, well, I suppose the US are dealing with in terms of the legacy of slavery, for example. We have a different story. Ours is a more colonial story. But as I read the newspaper headlines, there does seem to be the same lack of trust within Black communities and large institutions, whether that's the police, whether that's healthcare, whether that's social care. What do you think it's going to take for us to be able to rebuild that trust? How can we get to that new social contract?
Very interesting. Even this morning, I read a story in the news about a Black man who wouldn't take the vaccine, even though he was the right age and has underlying health conditions and needs it, because he thought that would introduce a tracking system from the NHS that would then identify where he is and he could face a deportation, although he's not illegally here. So his fear is preventing him from taking what is a health measure to give him life and to protect his life. Now, where does all of that come from? Of course, a lot of it is, frankly, illogical and unreasonable. But let's just be completely candid about this. If young Black men in particular, because it doesn't happen to young women in the same proportions, are 9 times more likely to be stopped and searched on the streets of our urban cities, but mainly London, if you're 9 times more likely, and according to Home Office figures, 83% of stop and searches result in no questionable crime, meaning that in effect, the vast majority go back harassed, frustrated, irritated, angry, feeling that they have been selected, profiled, intruded upon negatively. You spread